I would like to begin today by taking you on a brief trip down two streets that are very near to my heart. The first is the street where I grew up, and the second is the street where my wife and I have chosen to live for the past 11 years. Now, you may, just in looking at these two pictures, be able to tell that there are some contrasts between the neighborhood where I grew up and the neighborhood where I now live. The neighborhood where I grew up would be largely considered a very healthy community. Folks made moderate to higher levels of income, and it was relatively low crime. The neighborhood where I live now actually has more children living below the poverty line than any other neighborhood in our state. And if I were to draw a 150-yard circle around my home, I can count at least 3 people that have lost their lives to gun violence within that circle in the time that we've lived there. Poverty and violence are what people usually bring up when they want to contrast an at-risk community with a healthy community. But neither of these is what I have come to understand as the most significant contrast between these two different types of neighborhoods. That contrast is one that is seldom understood or spoken about. It's rooted in lots of good intentions, but it's having really bad effects in my neighborhood now. To begin to understand it, I'd like to look at something we have a lot of here in the Low Country. The direction in which a river flows defines the ecology and landscape around that river, right? So I'd like for you to imagine for a minute that all of the money that anyone touches in your neighborhood was flowing down your street like a big, giant green river of capital. You got the image? Some of you are ready to go for a swim, right? All right, so this is a representation of the river of capital that flows through the healthy community like the one where I grew up. The citizens in the neighborhood control most of that river themselves. Government and organizations control the rest. Government provides basic services and education, and organizations are really groups of citizens from the community that come together around a specific purpose, houses of worship, chambers of commerce, small business, and the like. But more important than who controls this river is the direction in which it is flowing. Because with a fair amount of relentlessness, the citizens and the organizations in this community direct the flow of capital towards personal and community strengths and opportunity creation. Each of you successful people today arrived here because someone saw potential in you, and they created an opportunity, an investment of resources that would be available to you if you but work very hard to grow your own natural gifts, skills, and abilities to be able to take advantage of it. And none of you that had the good fortune to go to college, for example, went to college to study what you were worst at. You went to college to study something you were good at. This river was great to grow up beside as a kid, because I knew that if I demonstrated any gifts or skills or capacities, the river would be there to nourish me to become the more or less capable adult that I am today. I believe that if you show me a successful community, I can show you a river, no matter how wide or deep, but that is flowing in this particular direction. Now, this is a representation of the river in the community where I now live. The citizens in my neighborhood control very little of the river of capital flowing in my community. They don't get paid well. The government and agencies control the vast majority of it. The government provides basic services and education like they do in healthy communities, but they also provide additional social services and policing, the kinds of things you hear about in urban neighborhoods. And then there are the agencies, which in contrast to the organizations in more healthy communities are not stewarded by the residents of the community themselves, but generally by well-heeled and well-connected outsiders who have the very best of intentions to do something well for people living in the neighborhood. And although the citizens would love to direct the flow of capital towards strengths like people do in other neighborhoods, they just don't have enough control over it to do so. But the government and the agencies are directing the flow of capital, by and large, in a very different direction. To get into the flow of capital of my current community, the government and the agencies say, you need to have a very bad day. We are here to help, and you are deficient, so simply prove to us your deficiencies, and you might receive some measure of our charity. This creates a major flow of capital strictly built around problems in an already under-resourced neighborhood. I know 2 young women that have grown up beside this river, both of whom have worked very hard to grow their considerable artistic abilities. They're now graduating high school. Both of them have gotten into a very prestigious College of Art and Design. Neither of them is aware of whether they're going to be able to attend or not, because there is no river of capital in my neighborhood that nourishes these kinds of things. Meanwhile, these young women are looking beside them and seeing their peers who might be breaking the law or demonstrating other deficient behavior and receiving significant public investment as a result, sometimes twice as much as it would cost to send one of these young women to college. Everybody's concerned about poverty, and nobody likes violence in my community. But this river is undercutting the goodwill and motivation of my neighbors in a way that is locking my community in poverty. It is flipping over any attempts to build a natural, healthy community economy by rewarding deficiencies and problems, while good families who are working hard and playing by the rules feel largely alone in their struggle. And what's amazing to me about this river is how it is rooted in a series of tributaries that are remarkably well-intentioned. They begin with the typical helping process, which starts out with very good intentions, sees lots of problems, and understands that in our society, to solve a problem, you're going to need money and influence, right? So they go about getting some wealthy and powerful people together. We put them in a room together. We call them a board of directors or advisory committee or something like that. And then those wealthy and powerful people set about defining the key problems that they understand are going on down in those distressed communities that they've never really lived in or spent significant time in themselves. In time, they begin to develop a major set of resources to go after these problems. And the resources begin to flow into the neighborhood. In my experience is that once these resources begin to flow into the community, two things become true. The first is that new agencies are born or existing agencies get bigger. And the second is that the problems, they seem to persist or they get bigger. In an under-resourced neighborhood, when all you do is create a major flow of capital around a problem, people with very little resources will begin to understand that it is in their interest to begin persistently demonstrating the problem simply to get into the only resources they see available to them. In time, this whole process begins to devolve when I hear those who have built the capital stream towards the problem blame those who are so persistently demonstrating the problem for demonstrating the problem that they need to have to get into the capital stream in the first place. This is when solving a problem is not solving a problem. And yet, so often we get to this point and we feel the only thing we can do is repeat the cycle again. A few months ago, I was asked to join a meeting of agency folks, good people with the very best of intentions. And we were given Post-it notes and asked to write down reasons why we thought kids were dropping out of high school. So, you know what people wrote, right? Any one of you could have written 80% of the things said that day. Low-income neighborhoods, failing schools, teenage parents, the list goes on and on. Well, I guess I had to feel like, here we go again. So I decided I'd write something a little different on my Post-it note. This is what I wrote. I didn't know they were going to start reading them aloud, but they did. So I had to explain myself. I wasn't just trying to be a jerk. The surprise to me in living in my neighborhood actually is not that kids are dropping out of high school. That seems a very normal course of events for the way we've structured things in my neighborhood, where we stack the deck for those young people. The surprise to me is that many young people are not dropping out of high school in my neighborhood. In fact, there are some that are doing quite well. So while it might be worthwhile on occasion to get us agencies in the room together and ask what's going wrong, would it not be worth a little bit of our time, energy, and resources to get those families in a room together and say, what are you doing right? And how can we begin to invest in it, to grow it? See, in our national dialogues around distressed communities these days, it seems we are so often stuck between one group, generally on the left, that wants to keep identifying problems and resourcing those problems, and another group, generally on the right, that sees the issues of increased dependence and entrenched poverty that kind of a capital flow creates, and they want to cut the capital flow off entirely. As usual, the best solutions make everybody mad, because the solution is neither of these. The solution, if you want to begin to nourish a landscape of opportunity in a neighborhood, is to build a flow of capital, the majority of which goes to nourish that kind of a landscape, flows to potential and strengths rather than problems. So I'll finish up today with a very modest proposal for a new kind of helping process. It begins with good intentions as well, but then we need to take those good intentions and let them motivate us to listen and learn alongside those that are closest to the problems. That means low-income people themselves. As we do that, we'll begin to see small bright spots, assets within the neighborhood, a family whose kids are already making good grades, a young entrepreneur with a great business idea. And then we need the wealthy and powerful people, but we need them to do what they do really well in the rest of their lives, which is to come along these small fledgling assets and invest their resources and knowledge to begin to allow these assets to grow. And as they begin to grow, the beautiful thing about growing an asset is as it grows, it begins to solve the problems of the neighborhood itself. And the even better thing about an asset is that once it has been grown, by virtue of being an asset, it is capable of not only solving today's problems, but other problems as well. Whether you're talking about an individual or a community, this is a process that leads to a bright future for everyone. Now, with apologies to the Charleston TEDx reinvention theme, I have a final confession, and it's that this actually is not a new or reinvented process at all. This is what people were doing in my neighborhood growing up every single day. If you live in a successful community, it's what people are doing in your neighborhood, even as I stand here and speak right now. It's no wonder there are more bright spots in those neighborhoods. There is a river of capital flowing to nourish those bright spots all the time. So, problem solvers, if you are coming to my community merely to diagnose the deficiencies of my neighbors, I have a favor to ask. Stay home. Please spend your money and time and educations and influence and resources doing something other than building a big flow of problem-oriented capital in a neighborhood that's already under-resourced. But if you are willing to consider the idea that it might be more efficient and even valuable to invest in someone on their best day rather than to sit around and wait to save them on their worst day, then I have a job for you. If my low-income neighbors have taught me anything over the past 11 years, it's that there are lots of bright spots, even in the most distressed corners of our world, if we just go looking for them. And what those bright spots need is not charity, but investment. It's a river of capital that flows to strengths and possibilities and not problems. And as that river of capital begins to flow, we can expect it will nourish a landscape of opportunity all around it. Let's get to work. Thank you.